The room is quiet. It's late. The lights are off. Your body is tired, but your mind refuses to land. You're lying there, staring at the ceiling, replaying the same thoughts you've carried all day. What you want, what you should be doing, what you're not doing, what might happen, what might never happen. You imagine a different life, more control, more clarity, more money, more respect, more peace. And for a moment, it feels close. But then something subtle happens. The same mind that imagines that life is the one that interrupts it. You reach for your phone, just for a second, just to check something. And suddenly you're pulled back into noise, comparison, distraction. The feeling fades, the vision dissolves, and tomorrow you'll try again. This is where most people get it wrong. They think they're stuck because they don't want it badly enough. But that's not the truth. You don't fail because your desire is weak. You fail because your mind is too tense, too scattered, too reactive to carry a clear intention long enough to build anything real. There is nothing wrong with wanting more, but there is something dangerous about wanting it from a state of internal chaos. Because when your mind is unstable, your effort becomes inconsistent. When your attention is divided, your actions lose weight. And when your emotions pull you in every direction, you stop being someone who builds and become someone who reacts. Stoic philosophy understood this long before manifestation became a trend. It didn't teach people how to wish harder. It taught them how to become steady enough to act. And here's the quiet truth most people avoid. You don't manifest by obsessing over what you want. You manifest by becoming the kind of person who can hold a direction without being pulled away every 5 minutes by noise, fear, or impulse. That's the shift. Not louder desire, cleaner command. And if you recognize yourself in this, if part of you knows that your biggest obstacle isn't the world, but the way your own mind keeps slipping out of your control, then leave a like right now. Not for approval, not for the algorithm, but as a quiet decision that today you're willing to look at this without turning away. Because what we're going to do next is not motivate you. It's going to confront you, calmly, clearly, and give you something far more valuable than excitement: control. And once you have that, everything changes. But to understand how, you need to see something most people never admit. The problem was never your desire. It was the way you were holding it. Desire is not your problem. In fact, desire is one of the few honest signals left in a distracted life. It tells you something in you is still awake, still reaching, still unwilling to settle. The problem begins when desire quietly turns into desperation. And most people don't notice when that shift happens. At first, you want something: a better body, more money, a different life, peace of mind, respect, freedom. That's natural. But then, without realizing it, the desire starts to carry weight it was never meant to carry. It becomes proof. Proof that you're not behind. Proof that you're not wasting your life. Proof that you matter. And now, instead of moving toward it with clarity, you cling to it with pressure. You start checking your progress, checking for signs, checking for validation, checking if it's working. You call it focus, but it's not focus. It's dependence. And dependence is unstable. Because when your emotional state is tied to an outcome you cannot fully control, your mind becomes restless. You can't stay still. You can't act cleanly. You hesitate when you should move. You rush when you should wait. You overthink what doesn't matter and avoid what does. And slowly, the thing you want starts to own you. This is where Stoicism draws a hard line. Not against desire, but against enslavement. You are allowed to want, but you are not allowed to collapse around what you want. There's a difference. A man who wants from stability moves differently than a man who needs from insecurity. One builds, the other chases. And if you're honest, you've felt that difference before. Think about the last time you kept checking your phone for a message. Not because it was important, but because you needed something from it. That small tension in your chest, that slight impatience, that quiet irritation when nothing appears. That's not ambition, that's emotional dependency. And now scale that pattern across your entire life. Your goals, your plans, your future. It's not that you don't know what to do. It's that you're trying to do it from a state that cannot hold direction. So the first step is not more effort, it's separation. You need to separate what you want from what you think it will fix. Here's a simple exercise. Take a piece of paper. Write down one thing you want right now. Be specific. Then underneath it, write this question. If I had this, what would it finally prove about me? And answer it honestly. Not what sounds impressive, what feels true. Because most people don't just want success, they want relief. They want to stop feeling behind. They want to stop doubting themselves. They want to feel enough. And when desire becomes a tool to escape your current identity, it stops being clean. It becomes heavy. And heavy desires don't move well. They drag. They distort your decisions. They make you act from urgency instead of clarity. So here's the shift. You don't remove desire, you refine it. You strip it of emotional desperation until it becomes something you can carry without shaking. You want it, but you don't need it to feel whole. That's where control begins. Because once desire is clean, your actions become precise. And once your actions become precise, you stop leaking your energy into everything that doesn't matter. Which brings us to the next problem most people ignore. It's not just what you want, it's how many directions your mind is being pulled while you're trying to get there. The mind cannot build what it keeps interrupting. That sounds simple, but if you actually look at your day, it becomes uncomfortable very quickly. You sit down to do something that matters. Maybe it's work, maybe it's planning, maybe it's something you told yourself would move your life forward. And for a moment, you're there, focused, present, capable. Then something small happens, a notification, a thought, a slight discomfort, a curiosity that feels harmless. And without resistance, you follow it. You open another tab, check a message, scroll for a second, switch the music, grab your phone, reply to something that could have waited. You tell yourself it's nothing, but it is everything. Because every time you leave what matters, you train your mind to abandon direction. Not once, but repeatedly. And over time, this becomes your baseline. You say you want clarity, but you practice interruption. You say you want discipline, but you rehearse distraction. You say you want results, but you reward avoidance. So when you finally try to focus, it feels unnatural, heavy, forced, draining. Not because focus is difficult, but because you've trained your mind to resist staying in one place. There's a quiet cost to this that most people never calculate. It's not just lost time, it's lost authority. When your mind learns that any discomfort is enough to pull you away, you stop trusting yourself to follow through. And without that trust, every goal becomes fragile. You start strong, then fade. You plan well, then drift. You commit, then renegotiate. Not because you're incapable, but because your attention is undisciplined. Stoicism doesn't ask you to control everything. It asks you to stop surrendering control where it actually belongs to you, and your attention is one of those places. Here's a practical rule: simple, strict, effective. Call it the first door rule. When you begin something that matters, something that actually moves your life forward, you open one door, one task, one focus, one direction. And for the next 30 minutes, no second door opens, no second tab, no second app, no second conversation, no checking, no switching. Not because you're trying to be perfect, but because you're retraining your mind to stay, to endure the slight discomfort of focus, to rebuild the muscle of presence. At first, it will feel unnatural. Your mind will look for exits. It will suggest just one quick check. That's the moment that matters, because every time you resist that impulse, you are doing something far more important than finishing a task. You are restoring command, and command is what turns intention into reality. Most people think manifestation is about visualizing the future, but the future is built in moments like this. When you choose not to leave, when you stay with what matters, long enough for something real to take shape. Because if your mind cannot stay, your life cannot build. And if you continue living like this, fragmented, reactive, constantly switching, you won't just delay your progress. You'll slowly lose the ability to direct yourself at all. So the question becomes uncomfortable, but necessary. Are you actually trying to build something, or are you just repeatedly escaping the effort required to build it? Because once you see this clearly, you can't pretend it's just how life is. You start to recognize something deeper, that your biggest limitation is not time, not opportunity, not even knowledge. It's the quiet habit of giving up control in moments where it was fully yours to keep. And once you see that, there's no way forward except one: taking it back. Stoicism begins where excuses end. Not dramatic excuses, not the obvious ones, the quiet ones, the reasonable ones, the ones that sound intelligent but keep your life exactly where it is. I'm waiting for the right moment. I just need to think this through a bit more. Things are uncertain right now. I'll start when I feel more ready. On the surface, these sound responsible, measured, careful, thoughtful. But underneath, many of them are negotiations with fear. Not fear of failure, but fear of commitment. Because once you commit, something changes. You no longer get to live in possibility. You enter reality. And reality is where effort is visible, mistakes are real, and outcomes are not guaranteed. So the mind delays. It calls delay strategy. It calls hesitation preparation. It calls avoidance patience. But Stoicism cuts through that language with something simple and difficult. There are things that are yours to control and things that are not. And your life will only move in proportion to how clearly you live inside that boundary. You cannot control timing. You cannot control outcomes. You cannot control how others respond. You cannot control whether something succeeds or fails. But you can control where your attention goes, what you do with your time today, how you speak, how you respond, what you practice, what you repeat, what you tolerate, what you refuse, and most importantly, whether you act or continue preparing to act. This is where many people quietly lose years. They stay in the space just before action, planning, refining, waiting, always close, never committed. So here's the question you don't get to avoid. Are you truly waiting for the right moment, or are you using uncertainty as permission to remain uncommitted? Because if you're honest, you already know something. There are things in your life right now that require no perfect conditions, no external validation, no ideal timing. They only require decision. A conversation you've been avoiding, a habit you keep postponing, a piece of work you keep delaying, a boundary you haven't set. You don't need more clarity. You need to stop pretending you don't already see it. Stoicism doesn't give you control over life. It removes your ability to lie to yourself about what is already in your control. So here's a practical way to bring this down to the ground. Take a page, draw a line down the middle. On the left side, write, "Not mine." On the right side, write, "Mine today." On the left, list everything that is outside your control right now. Outcomes, other people's opinions, timing, results, external circumstances. Be honest. Then on the right, write only what is directly in your hands today. Not this week, not someday. Today. One action, one decision, one behavior you can execute without waiting. Now look at the page. Most people spend their energy on the left side and neglect the right. That's why they feel powerless, because they're investing emotion in things they cannot command and avoiding the few things they can. But when you reverse that, something shifts. You stop chasing control and start using it. You stop asking life to move first and start moving yourself. And here's the paradox most people never discover. The less you try to control everything, the more effective your actions become, because they are no longer diluted by anxiety. They become clean, directed, repeatable, and over time, undeniable. But none of this works if your internal state is still tense, because even when you know what to do, a tight mind will distort it, rush it, avoid it, overcomplicate it. Which brings us to something most people misunderstand completely. Relaxation is not the absence of effort. It's the foundation of control. Relaxation is not weakness. It is command. Most people have been trained to associate tension with seriousness. If you're stressed, you must care. If you're overwhelmed, you must be working hard. If your mind is racing, you must be thinking deeply. But look closely. A tense mind does not think better. It reacts faster. It exaggerates threats. It shortens patience. It rushes decisions. It abandons consistency the moment discomfort appears. Tension feels like effort, but it produces instability. And instability cannot build anything that lasts. A relaxed mind, on the other hand, is not passive. It is available. Available to see clearly. Available to choose deliberately. Available to act without dragging emotional noise into every step. That's the difference. Not less action, cleaner action. Let me show you how this plays out in a real moment. A man wakes up early for an important meeting. He knows it matters. He prepared for it. He has the skills. But before he even leaves the house, his mind starts rehearsing failure. What if I say the wrong thing? What if they don't take me seriously? What if I mess this up? He imagines the room, the faces, the silence, the judgment. By the time he arrives, he has already lived the worst version of the event 10 times. So when it's time to speak, he's not present. He's tight. He speaks faster than usual. He second-guesses his words mid-sentence. He over-explains simple points. He tries to control how he's being perceived instead of focusing on what he's actually saying. Nothing catastrophic happens, but nothing sharp happens either. He leaves the room thinking, I need to be more confident next time. But confidence was never the problem. State was. He tried to perform from tension, and tension always leaks. Now imagine the same situation, but different preparation. Not more information, not more rehearsing, just one shift. Before entering the room, he stops. 3 slow breaths, not rushed, not forced, just enough to interrupt the spiral. Then one question. What would the steady version of me do next? Not the perfect version, not the impressive version, the steady one. And then he walks in and stays there. He listens fully. He speaks when needed. He doesn't rush to fill silence. He doesn't chase approval. And something subtle happens. He becomes easier to trust because he is not trying to control everything. He is controlling himself. This is what most people miss. You don't need to become more intense to change your life. You need to become more stable, because stability allows repetition, and repetition is what builds anything real. So here's a tool you can use immediately. Call it the 3-breath threshold. Before you reply to a message, send something important, make a decision, react emotionally, switch tasks, quit something halfway. Pause, 3 slow breaths. Then ask, what would the steady version of me do next? Not what feels good, not what avoids discomfort. What is steady? At first, this will feel small, insignificant. But this is where control is rebuilt. In the moments where you interrupt your own automatic behavior and choose something cleaner. Because your life is not shaped by your biggest decisions. It is shaped by your most repeated ones. And if those decisions are made from tension, you will keep creating a life that feels just as tense. But if they begin to come from steadiness, even slowly, even imperfectly, everything starts to align differently. And this is where another illusion needs to be removed. Because many people still believe they need to attract what they want. But what if the truth is much simpler and much less comfortable? You don't attract what you want. You reveal what you practice. You do not attract what you want. You reveal what you practice. That sentence sounds simple, but if you actually apply it, it removes a lot of comfortable illusions. Because it means your life is not shaped by what you imagine occasionally. It is shaped by what you repeat daily, quietly, consistently, often unconsciously. If you practice distraction, you become scattered. If you practice avoidance, you become unreliable. If you practice resentment, you become heavy. If you practice focus, you become effective. If you practice restraint, you become stable. There is no mystery in that, and yet people keep searching for something external to change, while ignoring what they are rehearsing internally every day. Look at a simple morning. You wake up. Before your feet touch the ground, your hand reaches for your phone. Not because you need something urgent, but because you've trained your mind to avoid silence. So you scroll, you consume, you compare, you react, and within minutes, your mental state is no longer yours. Now ask yourself, from that state, what exactly are you going to build? Clarity, discipline, focus, self-respect, or just more of the same? This is where most people misunderstand change. They think it begins with a big decision, a new plan, a new goal, a new version of themselves. But real change begins with something much quieter: evidence. Small, repeated actions that prove internally that you are becoming someone different. Not announcing it, not imagining it, proving it. Here's a practical way to do that. Call it identity evidence. Pick one identity you claim to want, not 10, one. Maybe it's, I want to be disciplined, I want to be focused, I want to be reliable, I want to be calm under pressure. Now ask yourself, what is one small action today that would serve as evidence for that identity? Not something dramatic, something undeniable. If you say you want to be disciplined, maybe it's 20 minutes of uninterrupted work. If you say you want to be calm, maybe it's choosing not to react immediately to something that triggers you. If you say you want to be reliable, maybe it's finishing one task you've been avoiding. Then do it, without announcing it, without negotiating with yourself, without turning it into a performance. Just do it and let it exist. Because every time you complete one of these small actions, something shifts internally. You start trusting yourself again. And that trust is not built through motivation. It is built through proof. Most people are waiting to feel like a different person before they act. But the truth is reversed. You act first, and then you become. And this is where manifestation, in its practical form, actually begins. Not in imagination, but in repetition. Because your future does not respond to what you wish. It responds to what you rehearse. And if you keep rehearsing the same patterns, the same distractions, the same delays, you will keep revealing the same life, no matter how clearly you visualize something else. So the question becomes simple and difficult. What are you actually practicing every day? Because that is what you are becoming. And if you don't interrupt that pattern, you won't need to worry about failing to reach your goals. You will quietly build a version of yourself that cannot reach them. But there's another layer to this, a deeper one. Because sometimes people are not just distracted. They are comforted by something that looks like progress, but isn't. And it's far more addictive than distraction. It's the quiet relief of imagining a better life without stepping into the discomfort required to build it. There is a hidden addiction most people never question. It doesn't look destructive. In fact, it often looks productive. Planning, visualizing, consuming advice, watching videos like this one, thinking about the life you want in detail. And for a moment, it feels good, clear, motivated, almost certain. But then nothing happens, because what you're actually experiencing is not progress, it's relief. Temporary emotional relief from the pressure of your current life. You imagine a better version of yourself, and for a few minutes, you get to feel like him without becoming him. And the brain remembers that. It learns, I can feel better without doing anything difficult. So it keeps returning to the same loop. Think, imagine, plan, feel good, do nothing, repeat. This is where people get stuck for years. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack ambition, but because they've unconsciously replaced action with imagination. And the more detailed the imagination becomes, the more convincing the illusion is. You start to believe you're moving when you're actually standing still. Stoicism has no patience for this, not because imagination is useless, but because imagination without action becomes a form of self-deception, a way to avoid the one thing that actually changes your life: contact with reality, where things are imperfect, where effort is required, where outcomes are uncertain, where you don't feel ready, but move anyway. So here's the interruption, a simple rule that breaks the loop immediately. Call it the 5-minute proof. Every time you visualize something, plan something. Get inspired about something. Feel that surge of, I should change my life. You do one thing. 5 minutes of real action. Not tomorrow, not later, immediately. If you're thinking about getting in shape, 5 minutes of movement. If you're thinking about writing, 5 minutes of writing. If you're thinking about fixing something, 5 minutes of fixing. It doesn't need to be impressive. It needs to be real. Because this does something powerful. It retrains your brain to associate clarity with action, not with fantasy. And over time, that changes your entire relationship with your goals. You stop chasing the feeling of progress and start building actual progress. Now, I want you to be honest for a moment. Not for me, for yourself. If you had to name the one pattern that has taken the most energy from you in the last few months, what would it be? Overthinking? Fantasizing? Comparing yourself to others? Delaying what matters? Reacting instead of choosing? Breaking promises to yourself? Don't choose what sounds intelligent. Choose what feels accurate. And write it in the comments, in your own words. Because the moment you name the pattern clearly, you stop being completely controlled by it. And that's where real change begins. But there's something even more grounding than this. Something that removes the need to figure everything out and brings your attention back to what is already visible. Because while people are looking for signs, their habits are already speaking. Stop asking life for signs when your habits are already speaking. There's a quiet contradiction in the way many people live. They say they're waiting for clarity, waiting for direction, waiting for confirmation that they're on the right path. But if you look at their days, the answer is already there. Not in symbols, not in coincidences, in behavior. Your schedule is a signal. Your attention is a signal. Your spending is a signal. Your conversations are a signal. Your routines are a signal. And none of them are abstract. They are direct evidence of what your life is actually organized around. But it's easier to look outward, to ask, is this meant for me? Than to look inward and ask, what am I consistently choosing? Because the second question removes the illusion. It shows you something harder, but far more useful. You are not confused. You are patterned. And patterns are visible. A man says he wants focus, but his day is built around interruption. A man says he wants peace, but he feeds his mind noise from the moment he wakes up. A man says he wants progress, but avoids the one task that would move him forward. So he asks for a sign. But the sign is already there. It's just not comfortable. Stoicism doesn't encourage you to search for meaning in random events. It encourages you to observe your conduct. Because conduct doesn't lie. It reveals priorities without explanation. So here's a simple exercise. Call it the calendar confession. Look back at the last 7 days of your life. Not what you intended, what actually happened. Where did your time go? Where did your attention go? What did you repeat? What did you avoid? Then ask yourself one question. What did my life say I worship? Not what you claim to value, what you demonstrated. Because if you say you value growth, but spend hours escaping, your life is not confused. It's consistent, just not aligned. And this is not about judgment, it's about clarity. Because once you see the pattern, you have something real to change. Not an idea, not a hope, a behavior. And behavior can be adjusted, not perfectly, but deliberately. This is where power begins to return. You stop waiting for something external to guide you and start reading what your own life is already showing you. And when you do that, you don't need signs anymore. You need decisions. Small ones, repeated ones, kept ones. Because there is something deeper than clarity, something more stabilizing than motivation, something that quiets the mind in a way no external success ever could. It's not achievement, it's integrity. And it begins in a place most people overlook: the promises you make and break with yourself. Peace does not come from getting everything you want. It comes from trusting yourself again. And that trust is built in a place most people ignore completely: the promises you make and quietly break with yourself. Every time you say, "I'll start tomorrow," and don't. Every time you decide, "I won't do this again," and repeat it. Every time you plan something important and abandon it halfway, something small breaks. Not externally, internally. And it doesn't look dramatic, but it accumulates because your mind is always watching your behavior. It learns from what you do, not what you say. So when you repeatedly go against your own word, your mind adapts. It stops taking your decisions seriously. It treats your intentions as temporary, negotiable, optional. And that's where a lot of anxiety comes from. Not as a diagnosis, but as a pattern. You feel restless because you don't trust yourself to follow through. You feel scattered because your own commands don't hold weight. You feel uncertain because your past behavior has trained your mind to expect inconsistency. So you try to fix it with bigger plans, stronger motivation, more pressure. But none of that restores trust. Trust is not built through intensity. It is built through consistency. Quiet, boring, repeated consistency. Let me tell you a simple story. There was a man who had tried everything: new routines, strict schedules, big goals. Each time he started strong and faded, not because he didn't care, but because he was always trying to become a different person overnight. One day he stopped, not dramatically, just honestly. He realized he didn't trust himself anymore. So instead of setting another ambitious plan, he made one decision. Every morning he would do one thing, small enough that it felt almost insignificant. No negotiation, no variation, just one action, done every day. Some days it felt pointless. Some days he wanted to skip it, but he didn't. And after a few weeks, something changed. Not his results, his posture. He stood differently, spoke differently, moved differently. Because for the first time in a long time, when he told himself something, it happened. And that changed everything. Not because the action was powerful, but because the relationship with himself was repaired. This is what most people overlook. You don't need a perfect system. You need a reliable self. So here's where you begin. Call it the smallest kept promise. Choose one action, so small that your mind cannot argue with it. Not impressive, not optimized, just clear. It could be 10 minutes of focused work, a short walk without your phone, writing one page, saying no to one distraction, finishing one task you usually avoid. Then do it every day. No exceptions, no adjustments, no performance, just execution. Because every time you keep that promise, you send a signal. I do what I say. And that signal compounds. Slowly, quietly, powerfully, until your mind starts to settle. Not because your life is perfect, but because your internal world is no longer in conflict. And from that place, You don't need to force discipline. You become someone who acts naturally. But even with this, there is still one trap left. One that pulls people back into tension, impatience, and emotional dependence. It shows up right when things start to work, right when effort begins to produce results. And if you don't understand it, you'll sabotage your own progress, because you'll try to hold too tightly to what was never yours to control. Receive without clinging, work without begging. This is where most people lose their balance. Not at the beginning, but right when things start to move. You begin to act more clearly. You follow through more often. You build momentum. And then something subtle returns. Attachment. You start watching for results. Not calmly, but closely. Too closely. You check if it's working. You measure too early. You look for confirmation in every response, every number, every outcome. And without realizing it, you begin to tighten again. That same tension you had before comes back. But this time, it's disguised as progress. You tell yourself, I just care. But underneath that care is fear. Fear that it won't last. Fear that it won't be enough. Fear that you might lose it. So you grip harder. And the moment you grip, your state changes. You rush decisions. You overcorrect. You lose patience. You start reacting again. And slowly, you disturb what you were just beginning to build. This is why Stoicism draws another line, not just around action, but around attachment. You are responsible for your effort. You are not entitled to the outcome. Not because life is unfair, but because outcomes depend on variables beyond your control. Timing, other people, external conditions, chance. So if you tie your emotional stability to those outcomes, you give your peace away again. And now, even success will feel unstable, because you'll constantly be trying to hold it, control it, protect it, instead of continuing to build from a steady place. So here is the discipline. You pursue fully, but you do not collapse emotionally around the result. You show up, you execute, you refine, and then you release. Not in a passive way, in a clear way. You understand where your responsibility ends, and you respect that boundary. This is not indifference, it's precision. Because when you stop begging outcomes to validate you, your actions become cleaner, more consistent, more focused. You stop overreacting to short-term feedback. You stop abandoning direction too early. You become someone who can stay the course, and that is rare. Here's a simple practice to anchor this. Call it the outcome release. At the end of any focused effort, after you've done the work, made the decision, taken the step, pause for a moment and say, either out loud or in your head, the effort is mine. The result is not my master. That sentence does something important. It closes the loop. It prevents your mind from circling endlessly around what might happen next. It brings you back to where your power actually is. Because if you don't do this, you will keep trying to control what was never yours. And in the process, you will lose control of what is, your attention, your effort, your state. But there's one more shift that takes this even further. Because it's not just about acting well and releasing outcomes. It's about becoming someone who can actually hold what they say they want. Because many people don't fail to get more. They fail to sustain it. And that has nothing to do with luck. It has everything to do with what's happening inside them. Create the inner climate your future can survive in. Most people think they are trying to get somewhere, but if you look closely, they are trying to receive something they are not yet built to hold. More money, more freedom, more attention, more responsibility, more success. But they never ask the harder question. If this arrived, could I sustain it without collapsing? Because it's one thing to reach something. It's another thing to carry it without turning it into pressure, fear, or self-sabotage. A man says he wants more money, but when he gets a little more, he spends impulsively or becomes anxious about losing it. A man says he wants more freedom, but when he has time, he wastes it because he never learned how to direct himself without structure. A man says he wants recognition, but when attention comes, he becomes dependent on it and starts performing instead of building. So the problem is not access, it's capacity, and capacity is internal. Stoicism understood this clearly. It never focused on acquiring more. It focused on becoming someone who could remain steady, regardless of what arrived or disappeared. Because if your inner state is unstable, anything you gain will eventually become another source of stress, another thing to protect, another thing to fear losing. And now you're not free. You're just managing a bigger version of the same tension. So instead of asking, how do I get what I want? You need to ask, what in me would mishandle it if it arrived today? That question removes fantasy. It brings you back to responsibility. Maybe you would lose discipline. Maybe you would become distracted. Maybe you would rely too much on external validation. Maybe you would avoid the deeper work once things feel good enough. Good. Now you have something real to work on. Not the goal itself, the part of you that would sabotage it. This is where manifestation becomes grounded, not in attracting more, but in removing the weaknesses that would distort it. Here's a simple practice. Call it the stewardship question. At the end of your day, ask, if what I want arrived this year, what version of me would it meet? Would it meet someone stable, focused, disciplined, calm under pressure, or someone still reactive, distracted, and inconsistent? And if the answer is uncomfortable, good, because now your work is clear. You don't need to chase the future. You need to become someone who can hold it. That's slower, less exciting, but far more powerful. Because once your internal climate is stable, you don't need to force outcomes. You become someone who can build and keep building. And this is where everything comes together, not as theory, but as action. Because if you've understood everything so far, then you're ready for something simple, concrete, immediate, a way to begin in the next 24 hours. Not perfectly, but deliberately. Now bring it down to one day, not your whole life, not your 5-year plan, just the next 24 hours. Because if you cannot direct one day, you cannot direct a future. So here is a simple structure, not perfect, not rigid, but real. A Stoic reset for the next 24 hours. You wake up, and before anything else, you pause. No phone, no input, no noise. Just a few seconds of awareness. You don't need to meditate. You just need to notice that the day has started and that your mind is still yours. Then you decide one thing, not 10. One outcome that actually matters. Something that, if completed, would move your life forward in a visible way. Not impressively, but undeniably. Then you ask the only question that matters. What is the action within my control that moves this forward today? And you make it specific, not work on it, do it. Then you begin, and for the first 30 minutes, you follow the rule. One door, no switching, no escape. Just contact with reality. Your mind will resist. It will look for exits. That's expected. Stay anyway, because this is not just about the task. It's about rebuilding your ability to remain. Then, throughout the day, you apply the threshold. Before reacting, before replying, before shifting direction. 3 breaths. What would the steady version of me do next? Not what is easy, not what avoids discomfort. What is steady? And you act from there. At some point, you will feel the pull, to delay, to escape, to negotiate with yourself. This is where you apply the smallest promise. One action, already chosen, no discussion. You complete it, even if everything else is imperfect, because that one action is your anchor. Then the day moves, not perfectly, but deliberately. And at the end, you don't judge the entire day. You don't create a story about success or failure. You do something simpler. You review control. What did you do that was yours? What did you give away that was yours? No emotion, just clarity, because clarity builds tomorrow. And then you close the day, not with noise, not with escape, but with a quiet understanding. You moved, maybe not far, but forward. And that matters. Because most people are waiting for a moment where everything changes at once. But life doesn't move like that. It moves through days like this, where control is practiced, where attention is reclaimed, where small promises are kept. And over time, those days become something else. They become identity, and identity becomes direction, and direction becomes reality. Think back to where this started, the quiet room, the restless mind, the feeling of wanting more but not knowing how to hold it. That man hasn't disappeared. He still exists. But now, something is different. The room is still quiet. The future is still uncertain. The desire is still there. But instead of reaching for distraction, he reaches for direction. One action, one decision, one moment of control. And it doesn't look dramatic, but it is powerful. Because he is no longer trying to escape his life. He is entering it, fully, calmly, deliberately. This is what Stoic manifestation actually is. Not wishing, not waiting, not forcing, but becoming someone who can. See clearly, act consistently, release outcomes, and remain steady through it all. You don't need to chase everything you want. You need to become someone who can build it and not lose himself in the process. Because the life you're trying to reach is not waiting for a louder desire. It's waiting for a quieter mind and a cleaner command. So before you leave this video, decide something real. One action you will complete in the next 24 hours. Not a plan, not a vision. One action. And write it in the comments, in your own words, not for approval, but as a line you're choosing not to cross again. Then follow through, quietly. And if this way of thinking, this calm discipline, this refusal to be pulled in every direction is something you want to build into your life, subscribe, not as a signal of interest, but as a continuation. Because this is not about one video. It's about becoming someone who no longer needs to start over every week. And if you're ready, start now. Not tomorrow, not later. Now. Because control is not found, it's taken. One decision at a time.